Quick demo of AI Grove. This is a developer tool that lets you quickly assemble production-grade APIs based off of all the pre-existing cool stuff out there from Hugging Face and all the different LLMs and even custom computation. So in this case, I want to build an API that is actually going to generate a blog post for me with a few extra bells and whistles. So to start with, I'm going to grab one of these blocks, and anyone can create these blocks and share them. And each block has its own structure kind of embedded. So upon inspecting this, I can actually come and just try this block out in isolation on its own. So I'll kick that off, and we can see that it's processing. And now that that's come back, we can see that each block actually defines its own inputs and its output. So we know that for a blog post, we want a topic and a word limit. And the reason we do this is that including the thought process first typically improves the quality of the resulting blog post. But what's nice is you don't actually have to know that whenever you use this block. Both the structure and the prompt are all kind of self-contained. And that's true of all the different blocks in here. So for example, maybe you want to generate an image from a text prompt. And I can come in here and you can see that it has the structure, for example, inputs and the height, width, and all the different parameters. So I can just try this out here, generate an image, and make sure that this is exactly the kind of thing I want inside of my API. Now that we had a quick look at how the individual blocks work, let's see how they work whenever you chain them together. For this API, I'm going to want to write a blog post, but I actually want a couple of extra bells and whistles. So I'm going to want to actually summarize the output of that. So I'm going to drag the output of the blog post into the summarize text. And we'll see how the data actually flows through here in just a moment. But after summarizing it, I actually want to go ahead and then translate the text of that into a couple different languages. I also want to classify. So let's go ahead and classify the text. And this tells us, is it positive, is it negative? And I probably want a header image. So I'm going to go ahead and generate an image for text. But as I saw earlier, there's a lot of inputs from here. And so what I actually want to do instead is generate an image prompt based off of a couple different things. So let's go ahead and take the summary text and get that into our prompt generator, as well as the classified text. And then we want the output of the image prompt to go into our actual generate image block. So now we can visually analyze our chain and sanity check it. We know that it's going to write a blog post, summarize it, translate the summary, and generate an image for the header. But like I said, this is a developer tool. So let's go ahead and go into our summarized text and see how the data actually flows. So because each of these actually has its structure or schema specified, that means we know the exact structure that's flowing between the different blocks. So I can go ahead and say in here that I know that the summarized text, it wants to have its inputs and some parameters in here. And so if I come in here, I actually get full autocomplete. And based off of the incoming data, I can say based off of the blog post output, I want to take that and use that as a summary. So go ahead and save that. Similarly for classified text, we'll say that we want to classify the summary and just tell us whether it's positive or negative. Similarly for our translate text, you can see that the prompt and the system prompt are in here, but we'll go ahead and include the adapter to tell it how to take the input from the upstream nodes. So the source text that we want to translate, that's going to be the summarized text. The context is that this is a blog post that has been summarized. And we'll go ahead and tell it that our target languages are Norwegian, Japanese, and Chinese. Next, for our generate image prompt. So this is going to go ahead and take care of lots of work for us. But we want to give it a hint. And that hint is going to be a combination of the payload from the classified text that tells us, hey, this was positive or negative. And the nice thing is, each step along the way here, you can see I can actually hover over this. I get a full doc string for each of the fields. And we're going to say it's either positive or negative about the summary of the text. So now we've given it a hint. And finally, whenever we go to generate our image from the text, you can see here that we're going to pull from our payload. I'm going to say this is our visual description, but also we're going to include some additional parameters in here, which again are all autocomplete. One of which is a negative prompt. And if I hover over this, I can see that this is things that should not actually be inside of the image. And our prompt generator actually has the negative prompts in there as well. And I see we actually have artistic style. So I'm going to go ahead and say in the style of okay, so now we actually have a full chain here. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. And you can see we can actually try this right away. Because I'm just testing this, I'll keep the word limit down to 200. And once we kick this off, you can see that each of these nodes is now processing, and it will take care of automatically parallelizing, it'll take care of queuing, retrying at each step along the way, and kind of enforcing the schema, the structure, the error flow, the data flow, all of that. And you can see we already have some data coming back. So for example, I can come in here and examine what came back inside of the blog post generation. So we got the thought process and the blog post itself. The summary has come through. The text classification says that this is mostly a positive story. It's been translated now into Norwegian, into Japanese, as well as to Chinese. And this is using a prompt-based translation technique. But you could also use specific models. So for example, Hugging Face English to French or Russian to English. We have our image prompt, and down here we have our image. So here are the puppies fighting off the alien invasion. Now, as I said, this is a developer tool at its heart. And so even though each block has its own form and each chain can just be used by anyone, even if they're not technical, by virtue of construction, this is actually building an API that we can use in production. So I can go ahead and, if I want, copy this as curl. And pasting this in, you'll see here that we have write a full blog post. And you'll see here that it also knows that it has inputs for the topic and the word limit already pre-filled. Now, what's slightly more interesting is if we actually compile out a new NPM library to use inside of our project. And this is NPM today, but this is actually language agnostic. You could imagine compiling out a Python or a .NET or a JVM based package. Now that we've compiled out this NPM package locally, I can actually come in here and just start calling. So let's go ahead and say we want to call our write a full blog post. And you can see here that each of the individual items becomes automatically auto-completed. I can hover over it and actually get the full typed and doc strings all the way through. And now if I want to look at the result, each node that was actually inside of our chain becomes individually addressable. And so having called it, I can see, by the time I get to the summarized text, I want to know what was the input that was actually put in there. Or maybe I want to know, for example, for the generate image prompt, I want to know what was the output of the visual description. So I can use all of this programmatically now. And again, I get just very nice autocomplete, very nice doc strings all the way through. Now, what's really powerful about these traces is that actually it includes a URL that you can go to and see exactly the data that flow through it at that moment in time. Let me show what that looks like. So let's say, for example, I have a poem generator. And go ahead and click on it. And I can see, for example, how the prompt is being generated as well as the system prompt. But probably I just want to try it first. I see it has a couple of different inputs. Let's say I want a poem in English about puppies befriending aliens. And we'll keep it short. We only want 3 lines for each of these. So I'll go ahead and submit this. And you can see that all this data is actually captured, both input and output. And now whenever I come inside of this to see how the prompt is actually generated, even though I get all the doc strings and whatnot here, I can actually go ahead and say, what was this at any given time? So for example, maybe I want a hint and say, this is the input dot description. And you can see the exact data that flew through this node at that moment is available to me. And this is live. So as I come in here and I type this, I go ahead and say, maybe I want input description along with the languages. And if I try to do something like incorrectly add it, you can see here that it's going to tell me that this is not actually going to work. But as soon as I fix it, and maybe I want to join, then I can see that the resulting string is exactly what I want inside of the prompt. So if I want to know what the prompt is actually being generated and sent over to the LLM, I can come in here and instantly debug and retry the exact node with the exact inputs and outputs. So that's an early look at AI Grove. It's already very useful. It's been great to be able to build out lots of different projects and then not have to worry about running them on my local laptop, just turning them to a production thing that has auth and queuing and logging and tracing and everything that just kind of built in.